Neurons are richly interconnected, and they form a complex network. Both axons and dendrites resemble trees with numerous branches fanning out and intertwining with the axons and dendrites of other neurons. At points where the axon output of one neuron is very close to a dendrite input of another neuron, a synapse can form. By means of a complex exchange of chemicals, a synapse permits signals to jump from one neuron to another, which allows them to communicate with each other. The human brain contains an astonishing number of neurons, more than 80 billion. But neurons aren't confined to an animal's central nervous system, its brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is also constituted by neurons, which carry sensory signals to the brain from the body, the skin, the eyes, the stomach, and so on, and carry motor signals from the brain via the spinal cord to the rest of the body, to the muscles, the glands, and so on. Activity in the brain results from the interplay of electrical and chemical activity. In particular, the behavior of a neuron is modulated by the presence of chemical neurotransmitters such as dopamine and serotonin. These chemicals are produced by special-purpose neurons with long, diffuse, axonal projections that disseminate the chemicals throughout the brain. Neuromodulating chemicals can also be delivered to the brain via the blood, which is how most psychoactive drugs work. The brain isn't just made of neurons, it also contains a vascular system that transports blood to all its parts, delivering the energy it needs to generate all those electrical signals. And it contains a vast number of so-called glial cells. These were once thought of simply as a kind of glue, holding all the neurons and their axons and dendrites in place. But the glial cells seem to perform a signaling function of their own, albeit on a slower timescale than the neurons. The signaling properties of individual neurons are more or less understood. The details are complicated, but simply put, each neuron adds up, integrates the signals of its dendritic input, and when the total reaches a threshold, it emits a pulse or spike along its axon. Precise descriptions of this process have been around since the 1950s, when Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley formalized the mathematical model for which they earned the Nobel Prize in Medicine. An essential property of the brain is its plasticity. During development, the connections in the prenatal and infantile brain undergo dramatic reconfiguration, as axons and dendrites grow like the roots of a plant, feeling their way across enormous distances, in neural terms, to establish new connections, as well as abandoning redundant ones. Additionally, throughout an animal's life, established neural connections are subject to constant changes in strength, facilitating learning and memory. Good mathematical models exist of these plastic processes too. Obviously, this brief overview doesn't even scratch the surface of what we know about the brain, and what we do know barely scratches the surface of all there is to know. However, everything in our burgeoning understanding of its inner workings lends support to the following hypothesis, which is enormously significant both practically and philosophically. Human behavior is determined by physical processes in the brain that mediate between its incoming sensory signals and its outgoing motor signals. Of course, to make sense of human behavior, we have to see it in the context of an embodied animal interacting with its physical and social environment. Activity in the brain is meaningless otherwise, but this platitude is irrelevant to the hypothesis. Put another way, the claim is simply that there are no causal mysteries, no missing links in the immensely complicated chain of causes and effects that leads from what we see, hear, and touch to what we do and say. The possibility of whole brain emulation rests on this claim.